afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Unhoused. This episode is titled Know Your Rights. Before I delve into the deep matter of knowing our rights, let me give you a quick quiz. True or false? True or false? Unhoused people have no civil rights. If you said false, because the police finds ways to criminalize, cite, unhoused people due council members and business owners vigilante pressure, then you are correct. If you said true, because unhoused people are protected by the U.S. Constitution and Martin versus Boise's Ninth Circuit Court ruling, which state that it is cruel and unusual punishment to criminalize unhoused people living and trying to survive when there are no adequate shelters and lodging to be had in the country, then you are also true. It is also a crime to prevent people from sleeping, sitting, and resting on sidewalks and parks. So you also are correct. Now let's look at the Webster's definition of what criminal is. Webster's definition of criminal states a person who committed a crime. Okay, let's look at it from another angle. What about a lawbreaker? A lawbreaker is an act punishable by law, considered an evil act. Now, I want you to consider for a moment what happens when law enforcement council members break the law and criminalize the unhoused. This episode addresses this. Joining us in the studios today is Executive Director Kath Rogers and Tarek Shawky, who will discuss this matter at length. But first, let us look into unhoused news. In San Antonio, police officer handed a feces sandwich to an unhoused man, wins his termination appeal. I want you to consider that. Joanne Otero, an unhoused woman, was brutally murdered looking for a place to sleep. 29-year-old Carlos Urios assaulted the woman who succumbed to her traumatic injuries to her chest. Ken Morton in Cincinnati, Ohio, an unhoused man froze to death at a bus stop. Juan Santiago, an unhoused man who was beaten into a coma, sheds tears before dying with his dog Cheeto by his side. In Los Angeles, California, rapper Blueface humiliates the unhoused in an Instagram video of throwing money in the air while unhoused people scramble on all fours to get their financial blessing, as Tiffany Haddish called it. Here's my response to that train wreck in my outro. Please listen to that further. Family of 7 in Atlanta lose their home to a fire, then become unhoused. In Houston, Texas, Houston police forces and throws away donated food donated to unhoused people as well as their blankets, leaving them with nothing to survive the wintry winter. So with all that said, let us look into our interview today with James, an unhoused resident of Echo Park, and his experiences with being unhoused. James is a Echo Park resident who has been targeted and harassed by the park rangers, law enforcement, and homeowners in the area consistently. He's going to tell us about his experiences recently with a sweep that targeted unhoused people during a crazy Christmas Eve. This is Theo Henderson, We the Unhoused. I'm going down across the street from Echo Park after the aftermath of what happens when you displace unhoused people with a short period of time. I'm talking to, what's your name, sir? James, and he's going to tell us what his experience in his own words, what happened. James, tell us what happened.
This morning I came back to Echo Park and we had gone to a clothing thing this morning, and so when we got back it was abrupt. They were making everybody take their stuff down and move the tents out, and we had to drag our stuff around. One of our friends was handcuffed, and I had an appointment to go to, so I literally had to leave all my stuff to my family and my friend and my tent mate to help get that picked up and go to my GR appointment. So I almost didn't think my stuff was going to get picked up and make my appointment. So it was really a big inconvenience, really. I mean, it was like, hey, we thought you were going to do it yesterday, but it was raining. You guys clean every time, and we keep it pretty clean. We don't make messes. We pick up after ourselves for the most part. So I don't know. It's frustrating.
This is a reality with unhoused people where he draws a very clear distinction. Many people say unhoused people don't want help, but here's the catch-22. When you're going to trying to get yourself on your feet like a GR appointment, you have to leave your things, just like anybody else that has a house. You cannot lug everything with you because they have restrictions and requirements. And if you can't do that and you leave it unattended and something like this, an unannounced sweep, you get all of your possessions taken. Thus, you start all over. So how does this? What would you want the rest of the audience to hear about this?
Just that we're a community out here too. We can coexist as communities together. Like, we can work things out. Like, we've tried to do our part. Like, we're people too, and a lot of us want to get back on our feet, but we need the stability to be able to do that, really, honestly. And
the public doesn't offer that stability because of the vitriol that is going on from the leaders, from the mayors, Mitchell Farrell, other politicians who believe that we are the problem and we need to find somewhere. What is your thoughts on, I went to City Hall yesterday, and I'm going to inform all of us because this affects us, that I was sitting in listening, and they stated that they only have monies for 600 beds. However, the county was only going to give approximately around $515 million. They're not going to extend the budget to the ongoing crisis. So what that means is that they have no more money really to give to help unhoused people. But what they do have is more money that they allocated for the police budget. The police budget, I want to remind you, is already bloated, but the police budget is already 80% of their calls are on unhoused people. So you can see where this is going. What is your thoughts on that?
Well, police do their job, but I mean, we work with the police, so why would they take that from us? If they don't want to deal with us, then why would you take money from helping and continuing to help us get out on our feet?
The reason is, why would they be okay with having that money? Why isn't the police unions saying, why don't you take this money that we can donate to the crisis, instead of them calling us over these crazy reasons, and help them build some beds for them so we are not seen as the bad guy? But that's too much like right. Mona, you have something else you wanted to say?
And if you see everybody that where you're noticing that we left the park and then we found ourselves in front of a church because the Lord looks out for us.
Amen.
Yeah. Incidentally, she mentioned some religious reference about what would Jesus do, and it seems like most of the people that claim that they are good people or Christians seem to be working against the message about ministry, about serving the poor, feeding and clothing the unclothed and naked, and helping people when they are not at their best. Instead, we're lambasting them or telling them that they're going to hell, or pointing fingers that that's their problem and they are being punished by God, instead of doing the altruistic Christian-like response. This is Theo Henderson from We The Unhoused. I'm going to see if I can find a few more and to give their experiences. Thank you, James. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
James, I've got to ask this question. How did you become unhoused?
Well, I came out of the Dream Center, and I chose Echo Park because it's a safe place to be, and it's a place where people can come, and there's no violence, there's no drama, really. And so it was a place where I felt like I could find a family and a connection, and really be out here. And for me, it's out here ministering and going to church and trying to live that lifestyle as well too. But it's having nothing makes you more humble to be out here. So I don't know,
So how long have you been unhoused?
About 5 out of 7 months here in California.
What brought you here to California?
The Dream Center originally.
The Dream Center originally brought him here, and after being expelled out of the Dream Center, you became living in the park. What is the challenges that you face? What is the hardest thing about being unhoused?
The shelter part, like having the tents and blankets and stuff to stay warm. That was like, hey, I had to rely on the people here for that, and there's not a lot of that outsourced. So I'm thankful for the people here that had that stuff to help me. So, I mean, there's not a lot of outsourced to help with that kind of stuff, tents and sleeping bags.
So you're basically relying on the community of unhoused people that understands the situation, which the society should be doing their part as well as being understanding. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, James, for telling me your story. Again, if it's okay if I come back and follow up an update later?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Our next guest is becoming a legal giant in the area of Los Angeles. I can attest to her legal acumen because she helped me out of a harassing situation by the City of Los Angeles Department of Recreation's employee and their staff, as well as the city council member, the LAPD, and what they targeted and coordinated the harassment along with the neighborhood prosecutor and business improvement district owner, George Yu. So Kath Rogers is the executive director of the National Lawyers Guild, and Tarek Shawky is a defense lawyer that dealing with people that have legal troubles and they are unhoused. So let's please welcome Kath Rogers and Tarek Shawky. Welcome to another episode of Weezy Unhoused. This is Theo Henderson for the second episode, or second part series of the Know Your Rights episode. We are in the studios with Tarek Shawky, a criminal defense attorney, and executive director Kath Rogers of the National Lawyers Guild. We also have a legal student by the name of Ada. So we're just going to go around and have a little brief introduction, and then we'll delve into the meat of the podcast. Let's start with Kath.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be with you. This is Kath Rogers with the National Lawyers Guild, and the National Lawyers Guild has long fought the criminalization of homelessness, and we actually run 2 homeless legal citation clinics. So if anyone out there is interested, these clinics will help represent you if you have a citation, an infraction citation that's related to your homelessness. So just as an example, some of the things that we represent people on are 4118D, or sitting or lying down on public property, the shopping cart ordinance, open container, some vending related ordinances, oversized vehicles, things like that, that are infractions. And we have one in Venice, which is run in collaboration with the Venice Justice Committee, and that's the first Sunday of every month from 1 to 3 p.m. And then we have one on Skid Row, which is the third Wednesday of every month from 6 to 8 p.m. And that one is in partnership with LA Can, and it's actually held at LA Can. So if you're a volunteer and you want to help out at the clinics, we would love that. And if you are unhoused and you have a citation related to your homelessness, please come check out the clinics and we'll represent you for free.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Theo, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And my name is Tarek Shawky. I'm a criminal defense attorney, former public defender. And in my experience, I've found that those who are unhoused, or those who tend to be on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, tend to get a lot more, they tend to be on the front lines when it comes to police interactions and police encounters. Cops are a lot more likely to target folks who have less money. So I've found in my time as a PD, I've tried to do a lot of legal trainings, know your rights workshops, and giving folks the tools and the skills so that they can flex their muscles, exercise their rights, be able to push back and know what the boundaries are, so they could safely protect themselves from the long arm of the law that often crosses the lines that they shouldn't cross.
Okay, so let's get down to the meat of the matter. While we're having an excellent meal, can you tell the unhoused community how your guild helps them, Kath?
Sure. Well, the main thing right now is the 2 monthly legal clinics that we run for infraction citations that I just went over. We also have a number of lawyers, namely Carol Sobel, Brooke Weitzman, Kathy Sweetser, who have long fought for the criminalization of homelessness. Some people might have heard of the case of Jones versus the City of Los Angeles, and that was a case back in 2006. And that case is not binding precedent because the decision was ultimately vacated because it settled. But basically, there's a decision that you can still look up, and it's a really powerful and influential decision, even though it's not precedent setting, that basically strikes down the city of LA's law that bans sitting or lying down on public property. Now, imagine a law that bans sitting or lying down on public property and how that affects people who are unhoused. It's basically only intended to affect people who are homeless, right? It's never enforced against housed residents. And the decision that is not published, but is, again, very influential, says that that it strikes down the law. It says it's unconstitutional because people who are homeless have no alternative to sleeping in public. There's frankly so many more people who are unhoused than there are shelter beds available for them. So there are people on the street who have no alternative. They have no place to go other than be on the public sidewalk. And the decision says that sleep is unavoidable. It's a physiological human need. Everyone needs to sleep, right? We can't, the case actually says we cannot exist in a state of perpetual motion. We can't be walking constantly. So basically, these individuals have absolutely no choice but to fall asleep on the public sidewalk. And so you can't criminalize someone for their very existence. So this case actually said that it's unconstitutional under the 8th Amendment. The 8th Amendment, for constitutional scholars in the audience, bans cruel and unusual punishment. And so basically, usually we think of the 8th Amendment as banning things like really inhumane forms of torture or disproportionate punishments, like think about, the death penalty for minor shoplifting or something like that. That would all be unconstitutional under the 8th Amendment. But here, the court is actually saying that you can't ban or you can't criminalize someone for their very existence, something that they can't control just by the nature of their very existence. So our very incredible attorney Carol Sobel was the litigator in that case, and ultimately it's settled, and it basically now, the settlement requires that the sit and lie law in Los Angeles cannot be enforced between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. So that's what the settlement holds, and that's still effective in LA.
I was going to ask just a little bit a follow-up question on that. How does the police get around that? Because I've noticed that they sometimes do run up. For example, I had an incident where a park ranger at the park tried to run me out of the park during daytime hours. He said, "You can't be here." And I says, "Why can't I be here? It's not after hours." And at the time it was full broad, almost 10 or 11 o'clock in the day. So why do they feel that they can use that to target unhoused people?
Well, one thing that we've seen a lot with law enforcement against people who are unhoused is that it's sort of like if law enforcement can't use one thing, they're going to find another thing. It's like whack-a-mole. Like the law enforcement is going to figure out some workaround where they're going to try to criminalize people. And they also do violate people's rights, right? I mean, we can tell you what your rights are, but we can't necessarily say that law enforcement knows your rights and cops on the beat are not always the ones who actually understand the law, right? So they're constantly finding new ways to criminalize people who are, and especially people living in poverty and people living on the street.
This question is for Tarek. What happens if I am jammed up by the police who doesn't know or care about the ruling or the laws or my civil rights?
It's a great question because it happens all the time where people get arrested for things that are not illegal. I didn't mention that I'm also a member of the Lawyers Guild. Kath is kind of like my boss because she runs the org, and we
Actually, he's my boss.
and we follow her brave leadership and into battle. But the reason I thought of that is we have cases where people come to us where they get arrested for resisting arrest. And that's basically the whole basis of their crime. They got arrested for resisting arrest, they go to court, and they have a whole trial where the prosecutor is basically, trying to convict them of resisting arrest. But you ask them, well, what's the underlying offense? Like, well, there isn't one. They just were not cooperating with their arrest. And it's like, well, how are you arresting somebody who didn't break the law? Mm-hmm. And it's like Kath said, they find ways to criminalize people that they want to criminalize, even if it's for nothing but not complying with an unlawful arrest and saying, you should have cooperated when we told you you're under arrest for nothing. And then when the person doesn't, all of a sudden they drag them to court and throw a jury in the box and try to paint them to look like the boogeyman and the bad guy and a violent offender. And that happens every day of the week. So I've learned a few tools through a lot of trials, a lot of experiences from sharing a lot of stories and hearing a lot of stories. I think number one is the same way that police officers now have body cameras and can record interactions, we also have the right to record interactions. And a lot of times that's your best defense because, a lot of people go to court if they have prior records and prior arrests, and it's a he said, she said kind of situation. Unfortunately, jurors are more inclined to believe the law enforcement officer because they want to believe that they're honest and upstanding officers who don't break the law and don't harass good people for no reason. So until a juror sees a video of somebody getting dragged out of their tent or dragged across the sidewalk for nothing and being thrown in the back of the car, they don't believe it when that person gets up there and said, I got arrested for nothing. So I tell them, record the interaction. Even just an audio recording is often very persuasive to a jury when they hear the tone of the officer. They hear the person saying, what's going on, officer? What have I done? Did I, break the law? And a lot of times it's just obscenities from the law enforcement officer, grabbing them, throwing them in the car, and then citing them for resisting arrest. I will say, though, as a caveat, when you do record the interaction, try to do it discreetly because police officers are human. They know that when somebody catches them doing something wrong, they're going to find a way to cover their tracks, right? So if they see you holding the phone in front of you as they're engaging in illegal police misconduct, they're going to find an excuse to take that phone from you and delete the footage. So ideally, you help somebody out when you see them being, mistreated by pulling out your phone and recording them from a safe distance. And when I say safe distance, ideally you want to record them from a distance where the officers aren't going to be able to run up to you and take the phone from you. And I always tell people, sometimes the best thing to do is when you see a police encounter where, something's wrong, cross the street, go to the other side of the street where it's a lot less likely that they're going to leave the scene of the incident to cross the street to go grab your phone. If you run up to them so you can get the best shot, chances are you're going to lose your phone in that moment. So sometimes it means, standing back behind a tree across the street, standing behind a car, and trying to be discreet about it. You're less likely to be able to keep that footage if you're standing over there yelling, hey, pig, I got you on camera. I'm going to give this to the Channel 7 News. They may make it a point to come and get that from you. So one of the things is recording. Audio and video recording definitely makes a huge difference. I've gotten a lot of cases dismissed based on audio or video footage because that's undeniable. They could sit there and tell me all day, oh, well, your client's lying, we don't believe him, blah, blah, blah. But as soon as you hit play and they see it for themselves, suddenly that case is getting dropped real fast. So that's the best way in this day and age. Everybody's got a cell phone, everybody's got smart watches now and options. So you use those options to your defense. The other thing to do is to file reports. And a lot of people tell me, well, why would I go file a report on a cop? How is that ever going to help me? It seems like a waste of time and it's just going to make them hate me more. I'm not going to do it. Again, in my experience, if you have a dirty cop, chances are you're not the first person that he's done dirty. And if he has enough complaints in his file, then as a defense attorney, I can get access to those files before trial. If someone tells me, hey, this cop is dirty, he did this to me, I could file a request with the court and tell the judge, hey, this guy, has dirty conduct, and I want to see if he has other misconduct. And the judge will read my motion. He'll go into the personnel file, and if the guy's personnel file has 10 complaints for similar misconduct, I get those complaints, and I can call each of those 10 people as witnesses. And I've actually seen police officers get fired because of this, because, you know, once you have 10 witnesses coming and saying this guy's dirty and uses excessive force and he lies in his reports, then eventually the DA is going to stop prosecuting his cases because they're going to keep losing his cases, and he becomes not only a liability to the department, but he becomes financially a burden on a department where they can't get convictions from a guy because he's unethical. So I tell people, file the report. Whether or not you think it's going to go anywhere, file it, because if nothing happens on your end, at least on my end, you know, if enough of these happen and people step forward, then eventually these people can get fired, which is the goal, is we want to fire dirty cops.
And if people want help with police complaints, contact the National Lawyers Guild and we can help you file a police complaint.
So those are the two of the most effective ways that I can tell your listeners.
I was going to say that very same thing. Like 4 years ago, I had a situation where I was surrounded by 13 cops, and I tried to go around there, and their way of mitigating the situation is they will try to intimidate you. So this is very good advice that you don't go alone, because they're not going to take you seriously, or they're going to paint you off as they're doing their job to have legal advice. I'm going to backtrack a little bit and ask you, both of you guys this question. What are your thoughts about the Supreme Court ruling or lack of ruling thereof recently? So give us a little snapshot what we're talking about, and how does this apply to unhoused rights?
Okay, well, today actually was the Supreme Court basically decided not to grant certiorari in a case called Martin v. Boise, and it was a Ninth Circuit case that was decided earlier this year that was basically great for unhoused rights. And we were all kind of worried, given the current nature of the Supreme Court, whether the Supreme Court was going to take it on. The anti-unhoused lawyers were fighting really hard and lobbying really hard to get cities and counties to all write amicus letters and briefs to basically ask the Supreme Court to take this issue on. And today, the court decided not to grant certiorari. And in order to grant cert, you need 4 Supreme Court justices to say, yes, we want to hear this matter. Today, they said, no, apparently they didn't have 4, and they didn't take it on. So they denied they denied cert, and basically the Martin v. Boise Ninth Circuit decision is going to stand. And that's a really important decision for a number of reasons. So basically, earlier this year, 2019, in Boise, they held that a municipal ordinance that criminalizes sleeping, lying down, or sitting down on all public property at all times is unconstitutional. So you may recognize that fact pattern from the Jones decision that I talked about earlier. It's basically the exact same thing. They actually quote from the Jones decision in LA. So it's kind of like a copy-paste almost of Jones in terms of the fact pattern, in terms of the logic. They actually use a lot of the quotes from that decision. But they basically said, under the 8th Amendment, it's cruel and unusual to ban sitting or lying down at all times, because, again, people who are unhoused have no place else to go if there's not enough shelter beds. And again, you can't help but to sit down, lie down, or sleep at some time if you're a human being. So that's what Boise held, and it has huge implications. It's the Ninth Circuit, which is the circuit we're in, and so that means that it applies to LA and, you know, all the places right around us. And so if cities in the Ninth Circuit have laws that ban people being on public property, like an anti-camping ordinance, an anti-sitting down ordinance, a lying down ordinance, all of these could be ruled unconstitutional under the 8th Amendment as cruel and unusual as applied to unhoused folks if they fit into the fact pattern under Boise. So it's a huge deal, and it's really, really great that the Supreme Court didn't grant cert. We're all really, really excited about it. And so now Boise stands, and so we're going to see how that plays out in the local courts. Yeah, so it's a great thing.
And to me, that case is a human rights issue. I mean, it's basically saying people who don't have a place to sleep still have a right to exist in our city. because realistically, what those laws are doing is saying we want you to disappear. You don't have a place to stay, you don't have a place to go, but we don't want to see you. So essentially, you're telling them, you can't exist in the city or in that place where this ordinance is. And to me, this law is basically a human rights edict that says you do have a right to exist. And if the city can't provide an option for you because housing prices are ridiculous, because we can't provide for our own public, then that's the city's fault. It's not your fault. And you do have a right to be here, and you do have a right to stay here. And, you have a right to stay where you need to stay. And to me, it is, it's a beautiful thing that the courts are recognizing the rights of unhoused people to exist where they have so much pressure from a lot of money from a lot of different organizations telling them, no, we want these people to disappear. And they had the backbone to say, no, we're not going to tell them to disappear. They're human beings. They have the right to exist. And until you can house them, then they're going to be where they need to be until they have an alternative.
Do you think they will have, do you think the city attorney like Mike Ferrer, Board of Supervisors, Catherine Barger, Janice Hahn, Mark Ridley Thomas, do you think that they will try to retaliate or fight back on this?
Well, one interesting thing to note is that the city attorney and the Board of Supervisors all filed amicus letters that asked the Supreme Court to grant cert in Boise. They opposed the Boise decision. Our city attorney, for all of his rhetoric around homeless rights, if you listen to any of his Twitter videos and things like that on his website, I mean, the rhetoric completely contradicts the action that he takes on this issue. So they oppose Boise, and now they will be forced under the Ninth Circuit decision to abide by it. They will have to abide by Boise, and if they don't, they'll subject themselves to litigation.
The answer I was looking for. I was going to say because that is important for all of us to understand our rights about this. One thing I wanted to ask about it is about the Boise situation. How do you think, what is the best way of us spreading the information to unhoused people about this? What would be your idea? Let's say, for example, not all of the unhoused people know this, but what would you consider to be an appropriate vehicle for us to give this message out to them? Because they might be under the cloud of, bluff by the police. I'll let you answer.
That's a tough one. I would tell them to listen to your podcast and talk to Theo. Listen, hear what he's got to say. It's about organizing. It's about teaching people. If go tell people who don't, and get the word out. Chances are the city's not going to go around advertising this to anybody. And like you said, police are going to still try to push people over, take advantage of the information gap when they realize that somebody doesn't know. And I guess it's up to the unhoused community to make sure that everybody knows the state of the law and could speak up for each other. And that's another thing, this is a chance for folks to speak up for each other. When some person who knows the state of the law sees an officer trying to do something that's unlawful, that's an opportunity for them to step forward and say, excuse me, officer, as of this date, the law says this, and this person has every right to be here, and I'm going to ask you to leave my friend so-and-so alone and explain to so-and-so that this is the state of the law. One thing I will say is, I always encourage people to proactively exercise their rights and educate others. And one of the ways to more effectively do that is to do it in a very respectful way. And I tell folks, even when cops are disrespectful, it's important to respond respectfully, not because they necessarily deserve your respect, but because if you don't, you're going to get the short end of that stick. And, folks who approach the police in an aggressive way, and, I imagine that a lot of your listeners already know this because they've had to deal with the cops a lot, and they know how to and how not to. But, folks who don't necessarily have a lot of police interaction and think that cops are just like everybody else, you can, go assert your rights and do it, as aggressively and forceful as you want. That's not necessarily going to get you the best outcome. So, be calm, cool, and collected, but at the same time be confident in your position and that the law's on your side, and be assertive without pissing them off, because that's definitely not going to get you where you need to go.
What if there are people that have been jammed up by these interaction citations that has been struck down by the Supreme Court ruling? Actually, the law should have stood until the ruling was in effect, but the police have nonetheless done these unjust things. So what advice, Kath, would you give to them?
Well, I'm going to largely defer to Tarek, who's a criminal defense lawyer. I mean, what I would pose to Tarek is what are some of the basic rights that everyone should know when they're dealing with police, in terms of answering police questions, in terms of rights upon arrest, in terms of all these things. If you're walking down the street and an officer comes up to you and talks to you, what are your recommendations in general for dealing with police?
All right, how much time do we have? I usually focus on 3 things that are outlined in the Bill of Rights that I think are very important in situations like these and others. The first one is your right to remain silent. And that may not always apply, but if there's a reason why you don't want to communicate with the police because there's something that you may have done that you don't want them to know about, or there's something that you have that you don't want them to know about, or you basically just don't want to open yourself up to any kind of criminal liability, you always have the right to be quiet. And, people who've dealt with law enforcement more probably know this better. You could just say, you know what, I don't want to speak to you, or you could just not respond. You could play dumb and just walk away, and that's your right. They can't arrest you for not communicating with them. One of the few rights that they still know that they can't enforce, in some places, like old movies when people got beat down by the cops until they spoke, they know that they can't get away with that anymore. So you literally, all you have to do is walk away and keep your mouth shut, and they can't force you to say anything. And, I've had too many cases where people wanted to talk their way out of a problem, and it usually ended up in them going away in handcuffs. Not to say that folks aren't smarter than the cops, it's just they can use words against you. Even if you think you have a great explanation for something, they can turn that great explanation into a confession, and suddenly you find yourself on your way to the station. So exercise your rights. Number 1, keep your mouth shut. Number 2, don't consent to a search. If you're not on probation or parole, they're not allowed to search you. So a lot of times they'll come up to you and act all friendly and say, hey, excuse me, sir, how you doing? I hope you're enjoying the weather. How about them Dodgers? What you got in the bag? Can I have a quick look? Do you mind if I take a look? And, sometimes people don't want to ruin the rapport that they think they have with this officer. And they're like, oh, this guy's being so friendly, he's being so nice, I'll just consent to something. And again, it's a horrible idea. You never need to consent to a search. You have the right to be free from search and seizure. That's an absolute right in the Bill of Rights. And it's something that protects us against law enforcement, because our founders knew that we don't live in a police state. We don't ever want to live in a police state. Bless you. And we never want police officers to feel that they have a right to go into our personal belongings without a warrant. So that's why the founders said, if the person consents, that's fine. If they don't consent, officer has to walk away. So you always, tell them you don't consent. And I tell people, even if I get pulled over and I have nothing in the car, my tags are fine, I'm not worried. If they're going to ask me to search my car, that's an inconvenience to me. They're going to ask me to get out of the car, sit on the curb, go through my vehicle for a good 20 minutes. And for what? I mean, this is a free country. Why would I sit there and consent to a police search for 20 minutes when I have better things to be doing with my time? So don't consent to a search.
I have a question, because I have heard this all the time, and there has been people have said this all the time. If you haven't done any wrong, what do you have to worry about it? Why don't you just comply? What is your answer to those kind of people?
My answer is that we were founded on a country where we have rights over police, and police are supposed to serve and protect us. Over the years, that script has been flipped to where now we feel like we're in a little bit more of a police state, where police feel a little more entitled to come up to people, to question them, to search them. I mean, even this notion that they're going to ask you for consent to search, that should be offensive to anybody who studied the Constitution or the history of this country. If there's no reason for them to search you, they shouldn't be coming up and asking for permission to search. I mean, me as a private citizen, if I went up to a female and said, excuse me, ma'am, do you mind if I have a look in your purse? She's probably going to slap me, and she should, because I have no business in her purse, the same way that officers have no business in your personal property. And just because they wear a badge and a gun, that does not give them the right to violate your privacy. And that's what our founders decided when they wrote the Bill of Rights. So it's not so much you have nothing to hide. It's, we want to assert our rights so that police officers remember that we live in a country where we're free from search and seizure. We're free from being stopped and frisked. We're free from being questioned without, probable cause that something happened. And we want to bring it back to that place. And the only way that that's going to happen is if people start exercising their rights in larger groups, right? When police officers feel like, 60 or 70% of the time when I go ask somebody, they're going to get offended and yell at me and be like, give me your office, your supervisor's badge number. I want to give him a call and I want to talk to him and I want to ask him why you're walking around asking me to search me when I haven't done anything wrong. And when they start to feel like people are empowered in their rights and empowered knowing that the law's on their side and the Constitution protects them, that'll make an officer think twice before they go and try to, do things that they shouldn't be doing. So it's about flipping the script and bringing it back to a place where it was intended to be, whereas we're all free citizens. The police are here to serve us, not to harass us. And until we confidently, exercise those rights, it's never going to be that. It's going to continue to be, a police state as long as we let it be. And again, it really is up to us. We have to be, strong and confident in the way that we assert those rights so we can flip the script. The last one I'm going to talk about is the right to terminate a police encounter. Whereas, a police officer will come up to you, and as long as you're talking to them, they're going to continue having conversation with you, try to get evidence, try to get you to give up somebody next to you, or, who's that sleeping in the tent next door? What do they do? Do they smoke meth? Do they sell? Do they do this? Who's the prostitute? Who's the dealer? Who's this? And they're going to sit there and talk to you as long as they can talk to you to get as much information as they can out of you. And you don't have to be sitting there listening to them. At any point in time, the quickest way to end a police encounter is to ask very politely and courteously, "Officer, am I under arrest?" And probably not, because you would have been in handcuffs already. And when they say, "No, you're not under arrest," you could say, "All right, have a nice day," and you can walk away. So terminate a police encounter whenever you want. It could be from the get-go, from "Good morning, sir, how you doing? Officer, am I under arrest, or am I free to go?" And then you can walk away right there. So that's an important skill to have, because people get intimidated by cops and they want to sit there and engage in the conversation because they're afraid of telling them that they want them to stop. But you have the right to tell them to stop. And the easiest way to do that is that one question: am I under arrest, or am I free to go? And you walk away when they tell you that you're free to go or you're not under arrest. So that's my abbreviated version of my Know Your Rights workshop. So assert those rights, exercise them, teach them to other people, let them know that these laws are there to protect us, not to protect the police. And until we start using them more frequently and more confidently, the cops are going to keep doing what they're doing.
This is one of the reasons why I felt this podcast, this two-part of this podcast, is so important. I also know that some of our Unhoused friends are experiencing this, and they may have some questions in themselves that I have not thought of. And I was wondering if, is it possible, because I'm thinking of a couple of parks and issues that are going through this, that we work out a workshop where they have some pre-planned questions they feel they can have and communicate. Would you guys be willing to come in and have a chit-chat with them?
I would love that. It'd be an honor.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we're here.
Okay. One last thing. If you could, on a billboard, say something about anything about the unhoused rights or community activism and such, what would that be? I will start with Kath, and I will start with you.
Well, I think in terms of the Guild, our motto is human rights are more important than property rights. And unfortunately, in Los Angeles, right now, our city leaders don't think that that's the case. And that's why we're here to flip that script and change that narrative.
I would also say that, everybody matters, whether you're housed or not housed. At the end of the day, everybody gets a vote. So we were talking about this before the show, about organizing and, possibly creating unions, coalitions, because there's power in numbers. There's certainly a lot of numbers of unhoused folks in LA County, and if we can organize that power, then we can change elections. We can decide who gets in the city council. We can decide who gets elected and what the policies are going to be. And that's another really good way to affect change, is to organize folks, show up when we need to show up, and protest when we need to protest, and vote when we need to vote.
And there you have it. Two of my friends, guests today, Kath and Tarek. I want to say Tarek. I'm sorry, Tarek. I'm going to get this name right. I'm going to leave you with the quote from Dr. King that says, "The arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." So once we find justice, we can have harmony within the community of Unhoused and Unhoused. This is Theo Henderson from We the Unhoused, and I thank you all for listening, and may we again meet in the light of understanding.